The male protagonist never imagined that he would be reborn as a powerless goblin. As soon as he was born, an old man stuffed a bursting insect into his mouth, and he named him Gobrin. The male protagonist also discovered that he wasn't the only goblin infant there. On the third day, the male protagonist was astonished by the goblin's growth rate. In just 3 days, he had grown to the appearance of a young human man. But since he had a second chance at life, no matter where he was or what he looked like, this time he would survive with all his might. On the 4th day, the old man said this was his last time delivering food to them. From now on, their food will depend on their own efforts. The protagonist immediately grabbed several insects and put them in his mouth. Then he discovered a strong but simple-minded goblin, and on his first trip out, he felt that this world was different from before. Many things were things that didn't exist in his previous world. The protagonist also tricked the strong guy named Gobgi into his could understand what it meant. It disappeared. By this time, Gobgi's saliva had already flowed all over the ground. The protagonist quickly gave him half of the prey. Otherwise, he'll dehydrate and die from all the drooling. Over the next few days, the protagonist, along with Gobgi, repeated their daily hunt. But this time, after eating his prey, he gained the skill of immunity. The protagonist understood. His strongest superpower from his previous life, absorption, had been reborn with him. Simply explained, he could eat anything, whether it was magical creatures, gold, or poison. Just by eating it, he'll gain the item's abilities. But unfortunately, the other abilities he gained in his previous world were reset after his rebirth. But this world should be teeming with monsters possessing powerful abilities. On the 6th day, Other heard that the male lead and his companions ate the horned rabbit. A goblin named Gobumer approached the protagonist. Then the old man, Gob, approached. He instructed the protagonist to use his fingers to tap his own skull. Level 86 information appeared in the protagonist's mind. Goblin said that the level 100 goblin will evolve into a more powerful level ghost, but only one in dozens might reach that level. Goblins also have the fastest growth rate, like the goblin lord before us. He's actually only 20 years old. On the 8th day, with Gobmate joining them, their hunts became much easier. The three worked together perfectly. This allowed them to hunt more prey. As the three were engrossed in their meal, the male, his appearance is ugly, he is confident he can live out a second life. On the 11th day, they discovered a cave. Driven by curiosity, the three entered it. But this curiosity almost cost the male protagonist his life on the 11th day. Luckily, the male protagonist had obtained the serpent's magic eye. This has a restraining effect on these bats. Otherwise, they'd really be getting their lunchboxes. After eating the bat meat, the main character also gained abilities like echolocation. At this time, the other goblins began to envy the main character and his group for having so much food. That night, they took action. They surrounded the main character with clubs. At this moment, the male protagonist's ability to sense auras came into play. Before they could attack, he made the first move and knocked them out. One of them even died because of the male protagonist's unintentionally released snake venom. On the 13th day, they discovered a pig that looked like Beiji. Under the protagonist's command, Kabumi injured Piggy's eye. Then, with Gobji's assistance, the protagonist used a weapon to directly eliminate the cute piggy. The protagonist also ate pork with the same taste as in his previous life. He also gained language from it, skills in multiracial prophecy, and item appraisal. Although these skills are useless in battle, they are actually very useful. Afterwards, they brought back all the food they hunted, and they distributed it to other weaker goblins. You know, helping the weak is something he wouldn't have done in his past life. Some things may have changed because of the rebirth. In his sleep, the male lead's level unconsciously increased to 100, and thus, he completed his evolution. On the 14th day, after the male lead woke up, he looked at his own changes on his face at this time. It's somewhat similar to my previous life. Who knows about Gobgi? He also successfully evolved last night, and the first thing they did after evolving was to fight for leadership. Then the male protagonist noticed something was wrong in the distance. It turned out that the Wolf King was leading the pack to hunt. At this time, Beiji nearby also sensed the danger, but it's too late. The male protagonist directs Kabumi to fire the crossbow he made. After hitting the Wolf Queen, the male lead and Gobji started to attack. After completing their evolution, they entered the wolf pack. It's simply devastating. Soon, they finished the sweep. Then the protagonist brought back all the food. Using this food, he forced the other goblins to submit to him. He promised to teach them hunting and weapon making. This further increased the protagonist's prestige, and his future path became clearer. That is, to keep eating. He made his way to becoming the king of this world. Not long ago, the male lead, while training his fellow goblins, suddenly noticed several unidentified figures in the distance. They appeared to be goblins as well. Just as the male lead drew his weapon and tried to stop them from approaching, Goblin Sama stopped him first. He said they were the outing group, meaning the fathers of the protagonist's generation. The protagonist was speechless. Then, the goblins of the outing group brought out their harvest from their outing. Among them were 5 human girls. Their future fate was self-evident. Although the protagonist knew procreation is an instinct, but he still couldn't bear it to see these girls suffer like this. He told the team leader, Hob Jian, that he wanted to protect these girls, but he was scolded by Hob Jian. "What kind of greenhorn are you? You dare to give me orders?" Both sides were poised for battle, swords drawn. Gob's father didn't know what to do. Just as the two sides were about to clash, 2 female goblins appeared. They suggested both sides take a step back and not let the feud between the two escalate. Regarding the suddenly appearing goblins, the male protagonist looked puzzled. Introduced by Gob father to purple-haired Hobri, the one with white hair is the mage Hobster. At this time, they propose to let the leaders of both sides challenge each other. The winner is the leader of the village, but they can't use weapons. Both of them the ghost spider. This time, he easily defeated Hobgoblin. The 2 female goblins were shocked. They hadn't expected that during their absence, such a powerful goblin would be born. Then the main character announced that he was officially the leader of the village. "Anyone who disagrees can challenge me." He assigned the human women to the warehouse. The human women who were previously in the warehouse had been secretly released by the male protagonist. Moreover, the male protagonist warned the other goblins not to harm them. He would secretly release them when he had the chance, but there was a condition: they needed to teach him human knowledge. Later, the male protagonist learned through communication with them that they belonged to a merchant guild. They were ambushed by goblins during their journey. All the men in the guild were killed. The surviving women were brought here, but luckily, they met the male protagonist. 28 days after his birth, the male protagonist brought them food early on. He found that they had already cheered up. Instead, perhaps it was instinct that led them to understand that it would be easier to continue forward. While they were eating, the sisters are a chef and a tailor. The girl with glasses is an alchemist, and the redhead, he was training the other goblins. For those who were slacking off, he was friendly, teaching them how to obey commands. 31 days since the male lead was born. Although it was raining outside, but the male lead and Gobgi were still training in combat within the cave. Meanwhile, Hobgoblin watched the protagonist, wondering what he was plotting. That night, the protagonist detected something amiss through his senses. Hobgoblin and several goblins snuck into the warehouse. The 5 girls were still asleep. Just as they were about to act, the male lead appeared behind them. The redhead was also awakened by the commotion. As soon as he opened his eyes, the goblin in front of her was killed by... Then, he apologized to the girls. The red-haired girl threw herself into the male protagonist's arms. Only this way could she feel safe. At this time, other goblins, hearing the commotion, ran in. The male protagonist told Gobji to drag all. He implemented the most severe punishment, nearly killing Hob with his sword. He died just as the sun rose. On the 32nd day after the protagonist's birth, wildebeest, a formidable foe, appeared. After the protagonist led everyone in hunting a wildebeest, they feasted on its body. By consuming the wildebeest, the protagonist obtained the Lin Kai-driven Linma's Sihu Mirror high-speed healing. The male lead tried to use the sword, although he doesn't know the principle. But as long as he thrusts his sword, it automatically becomes a triple strike. Night falls quickly. As the male protagonist is about to fall asleep, a figure suddenly appears. Thus, the night passed without a word. When he woke up in the morning, the male lead was surprised to find that at some point, Kabumi had also fallen asleep on his other side. 2 shoulders served as pillows for 2 women all night. Arriving at the training to be so powerful, this made him become complacent. He continued walking deeper into the forest. After walking for some time, he noticed something moving behind him. It was the red bear, the overlord of the forest. Under normal circumstances, killed the red bear in front of him. The male protagonist didn't expect the red bear to be so smart. It can sacrifice its own path to counteract magic attacks. Faced with the red bear's claws, even Nappa, a triceratops with also suffered severe burns, and his sword successfully remained in the red bear's mouth. At least now, the red bear can't breathe fire anymore. The protagonist stood up with difficulty. At this moment, the red bear didn't even show a single sign of falling down. The protagonist knew that if he suffered another blow, it would likely be a fatal injury. In the final struggle, the protagonist lost an arm, but killed the red bear. He was also pierced by the red bear's sharp claws. this battle and 99 of our own. Using his last ounce of strength, the protagonist begins to devour the bear. He also gains 2 skills from it. Double protagonist's mind, a message appeared. Level breakthrough limit into a rare species. Great Oni. 2.5 days later, the male protagonist woke up. Starved, he immediately picked up the red bear's head and began to eat. An oppressive gaze. Just as he was about to skin the red bear, he found that the knife in his hand had become as small as a toothpick. At this time, he also discovered that his body had undergone a huge change. But upon arriving at the village, other goblins thought that a huge demon had come to attack them. Upon learning it was the male lead, Gobmai complained about where the male lead had been for the past few days, causing her to worry for days. Just now, the male lead evolved into a goblin lord. Gobby looked at him in disbelief. Unexpectedly, the male lead, who was only a month old, had evolved into a lord so quickly. After his evolution, the male lead's body became bigger and stronger. He planned to go to the warehouse to find some new clothes and weapons. He startled the girls inside the warehouse as soon as he entered. After learning that it was the male lead, they relaxed their guard. But for some reason, Kabumi wouldn't let go of the male lead's leg. The girl with short hair learned that the male lead often uses weapons. She is glad to have her own weapon now. It's just that this weapon needs replacing. And she happened to use elf stones to make a short knife that the male lead can use. The twin sisters also said that they're too busy right now. It would be even better if someone could help them. The male lead readily agreed. He has assigned them more female goblins. Watching them once face the goblins, as if they were enemies, now they were able to let go of their animosity in such a short time. The poison made by the apprentice sorceress girl, turns out she was using it for self-defense. But after learning that among the goblins there were also people she could trust, like the main character, she abandoned the idea of poisoning the food. Seeing how imposing the male lead has become now, she also felt indescribable at this moment. The next day, the male lead discovered that after his upgrade to a greater goblin, his strength was terrifying. Ordinary goblins were on the brink of death with a single light blow from him. At this time, Kabujiang was digging for elf stones. He unintentionally discovered a carbuncle elf covered in blood. The male protagonist used healing magic to temporarily save it. After a short while, the elf woke up. Upon learning that the male protagonist had saved her, she explained what had happened. It turned out her name was Lysitana. She had just been attacked by humans. That's why she was so badly injured. And the reason why humans attacked her was for the gem on her head, because that gem is worth over $1 billion. Then, Lysitana asked the protagonist to help her repel those human adventurers, and explained that she was actually a very famous, legendary mage. The artificial carbuncle created by Velvet was also the guardian of the hidden treasure left behind by its master. Because of the human's attack, its core was severely damaged. It also knew that its lifespan was not long, and among the hidden treasures were many velvets, legendary items collected throughout its life. Rather than letting those adventurers seize them, it's better to leave it to the male lead to inherit. Upon hearing about the numerous treasures, the male lead immediately agreed. He then gathered the other goblins and planned to head to the treasure hall immediately. Under the Goblin King's guidance, the male lead successfully arrived at the treasure hall. In order to demonstrate the principle of courtesy before force, the male protagonist plans to go find the adventurer alone. If he can dissuade them then, that would be best. He hadn't been gone long when he encountered human adventurers. Then, without a word, they attacked him. They didn't expect that the assassin's hidden presence would be ineffective against him. They then swarmed him and attacked. While dodging, he noticed many of them possessed high-quality magical items, but their fighting skills were atrocious. Even with magical items, it couldn't compensate for their own shortcomings. Then, a magical lightning bolt struck him. Just when they thought victory was theirs, the male lead wasn't injured. Instead, he was thoroughly enraged. Then, the male lead not only eliminated his enemy, but also devoured them. Because of this, he obtained the skills of a professional assassin, professional crusader, and professional paladin, high-level magic, professional priest, and professional enchanter. And they found a magic backpack among their belongings, as well as a concealment ring and several other magic items. After the male lead swallowed the magic backpack, he gained the ability to hide his presence and store items in an extra-dimensional space. He also acquired a magic storage box. Then they were led by Lysitana to the deepest treasure hall. In the center was Velvet, the master of this place. Lysitana expressed her sincere gratitude to the male lead and his companions for their help. After thanking him, knowing she was about to disappear, she told him he could freely dispose of the treasures in this place. Then she vanished in a golden light, leaving only the gem on her head behind. Without hesitation, the male lead swallowed the gem. He subsequently gained the skill, Golden Rule. While collecting treasures, the protagonist didn't expect the space inside the magic storage box he obtained to be so large. After putting all the treasures inside, he found it still wasn't full. Leaving, he looked at the empty treasure haul, and the protagonist couldn't bear to leave Velvet alone there, so he burned his ashes to dust. But unexpectedly, he dropped a piece of equipment. Back at his base, the main character distributed the weapons among the other goblins. He himself took the Crimson Spear, the magic bracelet, and the silver wristband, these 3 legendary weapons. It is said that just possessing one of legendary weapons is enough to shake a whole country. A few days later, the protagonist went hunting alone in search of unknown prey. He went hunting alone. However, while venturing through the forest, he inadvertently discovered a large, glowing tree. Little did he know, here he will face an unprecedented crisis. Gob said, "There exists a race of tree spirits in this world. They seduce males of other intelligent species, turning them into their nourishment." Don't ask why the male protagonist thought of this, because he's currently experiencing it, though he's trying his best to resist. But some things will inevitably react. If this continues, and he doesn't take the initiative, he'll absolutely be turned into nourishment. After 2.5 seconds, the male protagonist ended the war and obtained the tree spirit's favor. Afterwards, the male protagonist found a waterfall and washed away the scent of the tree spirit and some unknown viscous fluid. Back at the base, the male protagonist finds the women at the base don't seem pleased. The male protagonist finds the calm, green-haired girl. He wants to ask what's going on. The answer is that they're jealous. It's all because he's been meeting someone outside. He came back without even wiping away the hickey on his neck. The male lead should understand their intentions. The green-haired girl's next move shocked him. The male lead was also at a loss at this moment because he hadn't experienced this before. But I won't go into detail about what happened next. The male lead, who had evolved into a goblin ogre, didn't expect that his fame would spread so far. He would never have expected to be provoked by others. The aggressors are the self-proclaimed noble elves. It turns out that humans have their eyes on the elves' treasure. War is inevitable. So, the purpose of their visit is to gather other weak races to serve as cannon fodder. And goblins, in their eyes, are the best cannon fodder among other. Despite this, they still made a surface promise that they would give the village where the male lead lives 2 months' worth of food as payment. The male lead refused them without a second to lose his head. He should tell the people in hiding to put down their bows and arrows. The male lead wasn't interested in their request. As a member of the forest, he would naturally intervene if humans dared to act recklessly, but that didn't mean others could order him around. Immediately, the male lead unleashed the blood-stained red spear army. Countless red spears surrounded the elves. Although he didn't know the principle, as long as he was within the range of this bloodthirsty, thorny power, within a radius of 1 kilometer of the object pierced, he can endlessly summon red spears. Seeing the male protagonist's terrifying power, the elves were so scared that they didn't dare stay in front of him for a moment. After this intimidation, the elves shouldn't come again. The next day, while hunting, the male protagonist discovered a gray slime. After easily defeating it, the male lead ate the gray slime's core. Then, he bit his finger. He dripped his blood onto the stone. The next moment, the blood began to change. It soon transformed into a miniature figure that looked exactly like him. Furthermore, he could share the miniature figure's vision and hearing. Then the male lead suddenly had a good idea. The next day, he had the girls wear a suit infused with his own blood. This way, in an emergency, he could sense their changes. On the 47th day after the male lead's birth, his blood was bound particularly tightly. Then they were taken to a cave. The male lead questioned the squad captain, asking why he was causing him trouble again, but he was audacious enough to say, "It's all because of the stupid captain dead." Others had to write simulations for goblin fighting, and only the winners could survive. Following the protagonist's manipulation, only 6 of the 23 participating spirits were defeated, and all 6 were male. He showed mercy to the women. After consuming the defeated spirits, the protagonist obtained dark green residence, elf messenger, archery experience and tracking skills, invisibility and other skills. Gobu said that but he also said that if he didn't give himself a shot, he was about to explode from holding it in for so long. Then the male protagonist thought of a good solution. Day 48. Under the influence of the male protagonist, Gobgi hunted diligently every day. After hunting a brown bear, he finally reached level 100. Day 49. Gobgi woke up and had evolved into an ogre. The men looked at him in surprise. Gobgi's entire being had changed. He had evolved into a subspecies. His skin had turned a reddish bronze color. This was caused by the blessing of the flame subgod, and his skin was as hard and shiny as steel. This was because he simultaneously possessed the blessing of the war subgod, Gobji, after becoming a great ogre. The first thing was to compete with the male lead. Thanks to the male lead's slightly superior fighting skills, he narrowly defeated Gobugi, and the male lead realized that if they weren't on the same side, Gobugi will surely be a strong opponent for him. When the exhausted male protagonist returned to his cave to rest at night, a mysterious voice came. A mysterious figure, resembling Gob, approached the male protagonist. The male protagonist found himself in bed. Day 51. Perhaps stimulated by Gobugi, for more goblins evolved into Oni. The green-haired girl then also examined them in detail. She discovered that one goblin possessed the aptitude of a mage while the other possessed the aptitude of a cleric. The male protagonist also noticed Hobbs' changes. She also woke up this morning to find that she had completed her evolution and evolved into a half-demon mage of the Oni type. However, the goblins shouldn't have this kind of emblem on their bodies, and it's very similar to the markings on the male lead. Hobbs then showed her magic. It's overflowing now. She couldn't wait to experiment. Then she and the male lead went to a clearing. She transformed her magic into, and the male lead noticed that this village now has an extremely high evolution rate. This must have something to do with him. Moreover, the closer the goblins is to him, the faster they evolve, and those goblins from the previous generation haven't changed at all. Day 52. The male lead and Gobji returned from hunting and encountered some older goblins who were about to leave. The male lead didn't stop them, and to help them survive outside, he gave them a small knife made of mithril, a magical metal. He gave it to them. Then the protagonist watched them leave the village. Later, while walking in the forest, he saw Piggy dragging a human. It seemed the human was already dead, but the protagonist still discovered something special about the human. And that very night, the green-haired girl gave the male lead a surprise. Day 54. The male lead made some earrings containing his own blood, and after testing, he could communicate with whoever was wearing them at any time. On subsequent hunts, the male protagonist uses Warcraft breeding skills to conquer the Triangle Horse monster, and the male protagonist will also use powerful Grizzly Bear as a hunting tool. The Black Wolf King has also become the male protagonist's pet, and is used specifically to protect the safety of the girls. Day 59. Something shocking happened to the male protagonist. Although she'll die if she eats monsters irregularly, her ability growth is a Don't know why the male protagonist discovers some races that are all gathering towards him one after another, and he couldn't decide whether this situation was good or bad. How outrageous is the goblin hero? Only one spider silk can eavesdrop on human intelligence from miles away. Big Chan discovered that humans were cheating this time. They kidnapped the elf clan chief's daughter. They appeared here to ambush the elves when they returned from the festival, and they also learned that there was an inside man among the elves. After nightfall, the male protagonist discovered that the elves had indeed appeared here. The chief's daughter was sitting in the palanquin. Her beauty astonished even the worldly wise male protagonist. Just then, human force launched an attack. In moments, they eliminated the surrounding elves, successfully capturing the chieftain's daughter, although the male protagonist didn't want to get involved. He subsequently appeared before the humans using his skills to control spider silk and rocks. He easily dispatched the humans. After returning to the residence and undergoing interrogation, he learned that humanity would launch an attack against the elves within 20 days. Subsequently, humans without value became tools for the male protagonist to gain abilities. After treatment, the chief's daughter also woke up. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw the male protagonist's handsome face. Startled, she screamed, arms crossed over her chest. The male lead also noticed the wings on her back. After the explanation, the chief's daughter calmed down, but upon learning that her guards had all been killed by humans, she rushed to the male lead and blamed him, asking why he hadn't saved them. He then flicked her away with a single finger. He explained that the conflict between the elves and humans was none of his concern, and there's a human traitor among the elves tribe. Instead of panicking here, let's think about what to do next. Unexpectedly, the chief's daughter of the elf tribe started crying again. The male lead was speechless. He said he would send her back the next day. The next day, the male lead asked why the elves have wings behind them. The chieftain's daughter told the male lead that only high companions finally arrived at the elf village. Through sensing their auras, the male lead discovered there are at least 25 elves in the dark. Prepare to take action on yourself. Fortunately, the patriarch's daughter intervened in time. Otherwise, these elves will be in bad luck. Then the male protagonist and the others successfully entered the village. The person sitting here is the leader of the elf clan. He was very grateful to the hero for saving his daughter. The male protagonist goes directly to the topic. He said he saved his daughter not out of kindness. The clan leader instantly understood. He activated his scroll, taking out a mysterious heirloom-level weapon. The scroll activated the famed, never-missing bow. This shows how important his daughter is to him. The male protagonist then said his previous words were just a test. However, he still accepted the weapon, and he told them about the human attack. Afterwards, the chieftain and the male protagonist established a good relationship, and gave the male protagonist many pieces of equipment made of mithril. At this time, the chieftain asked at any time if anything happened. The male protagonist woke up and called Gabumi when he found that Gabumi had actually completed its evolution and become a half-vampire subspecies. She received the blessing of the icefield god Jing. Therefore, she can create and manipulate large amounts of ice, and her awakened enchanting eyes. Even the male lead doesn't dare to look. Gobjiang is changed to Asjiang, Ogalang and Ogaji. Then the male lead began to prepare for the upcoming war. Ear bone clips for communication were distributed to everyone, but the elven girls stated that they would not wear them, because for the elves, wearing ornaments in their ears is a serious taboo. Then the male lead had no choice. Then he tried to find them training partners for combat. He used the skills he had previously obtained to generate low-level undead. He summoned skeletons to fight, but the male protagonist summoned black bones, wearing incredibly powerful equipment. For the skeleton's equipment, the larger the area it covers, the higher the quality. Even those skilled at fighting undead, elves wielding mithril weapons seem unable to win either. But the elves who lost all had a look of exhilaration on their faces. After 100 million experiments, the protagonist discovered that by suppressing his magical power, he could summon ordinary skeletons. But undead creatures in sunlight are purified in just 10 seconds. So the male lead can only use this skill at night. Judging from the current situation, the protagonist's village has grown to several hundred people. The next day, the protagonist came to the cave where the dog-headed people used to live. After moving out the useful things, Aslan just used a hoe, and the cave was buried. Returning to the cave, the male lead discovers the battle axe he used to defeat the red bear before, reforged by the blacksmith girl. This battle axe is now made of elfstones and mithril. Because the blacksmith girl is familiar with using elfstones, she has also become an elfstone blacksmith. Later, Agaji finds the male lead looking embarrassed. After repeated questioning, the male lead finally reveals. It turns out he's always liked Asjiang. After Asjiang became a half-landmine ghost, he couldn't control his feelings just looking at her. He frantically begged the male lead to help him. The male lead immediately told him to confess to Asjiang tonight. Confessing early means even if he fails, he won't be too hurt. Agaji's expression at this moment was like a child about to do something naughty. That night, Agaji summoned the courage to find Asjiang. He boldly confessed his feelings. The next day during training, facing the energetic Agaji, the male lead took quite a few hard hits. The male lead understood that his confession from last night had been successful. Actually, yesterday, the male lead had consulted with Lemii. Ultimately, they both agreed to it, but the male lead was still worried about Agaji's forceful nature. He might accidentally hurt Asjiang. But seeing Asjiang, the male lead realized he was overthinking. Now Agaji and the armor was incredibly strong. It even had self-healing capabilities and an attack dispersal mechanism. But this look was quite eye-catching. However, Lemii thought it was perfect. The male lead immediately deactivated the armor. Having no other choice, the male lead just grabbed some clothes. This was the male lead's 69th day of life. When it rained, he had to stay in the cave. Under the male lead's training, the red-haired girl was steadily growing stronger. After training the red-haired girl, the male lead went to the blacksmith girl. Lately, many elves have been coming to her. They discussed how to make new weapons. Previously, they were developing a repeating crossbow, and it's quite effective. In the evening, the male lead went to see the chef sisters. He really liked their cooking. Then it was the alchemist girl. He was attracted by an unusual joke she made. And after that, the next morning, someone reported that unseen elves had appeared at the entrance. It turned out they were sent by the elf king to see the male lead. Entering the cave, they brushed past the elves here. However, the disgraced, and on a massive scale, their elven forces alone are no match for them. So they're asking the male protagonist for help. They won't be stingy with the reward, but they hope he will completely annihilate the enemy forces. The male lead agreed, but on the condition that his men would be free to act independently. He then gave them communication devices of his own making. After they left, the male lead sent out numerous clones into the forest. Just now, the scouts the male lead sent out discovered traces of the human army. He then led a mercenary group of 73 members, including 36 main members and magic users controlled by Cybexing magic, launching a surprise attack in the morning. Unexpectedly, the human military base's perimeter was protected by a defensive barrier. The male protagonist immediately ordered everyone to surround the barrier. After everyone reached their designated positions, the male lead unleashes a strengthened final shot using his silver wrist device. In an instant, the human army's defensive barrier shatters like paper. While the human soldiers are still stunned, Asjiang unleashes the power of the earth, directly cutting off the humans' escape route, leaving them trapped. Next, Sibsing and Lemai lead the charge, each unleashed magic, creating a world of ice and fire. Meanwhile, the male protagonist was off to the side, frantically summoning undead skeletons, and continuously firing his weapon, eliminating a large number of soldiers. However, this was not enough to eliminate all the human troops. And now, the human forces who had reacted began their counterattack. Leading them was a female knight. The male lead also discovers that the female knight is the commander here. Meanwhile, the female knight discovers the male lead is the one controlling the undead army. She immediately orders a full-scale attack on him. Under the protection of the human mages, everyone charges towards the male lead, but this action of theirs will trap them in an inescapable predicament. Relying only on magical enhancements, the female knight lunged at the male protagonist's heart, but she clearly underestimated his strength. She was flung away upon contact. Seeing this, the female knight audaciously declared, if he could defeat her, she would submit to his disposal. Hearing this, the male protagonist felt a surge of excitement. He immediately ordered her captured alive. The rest, kill or eat, do as you please. Then, it wasn't so much a battle as it was a one-sided massacre. Agaji's single strike wiped out a whole swathe of humans. The alluring magic eyes Lemai unleashed caused countless soldiers to fall victim. They wildly attacked their own comrades. This was also Lemmy's first time witnessing the power of the bewitching demon eye. Cybex, on the other hand, uses the blood of dead human soldiers, constantly toying with the living soldiers. As Jiang watched his companion's actions, he too became impatient. Immediately, he swung his hoe. What the main character didn't expect was that they effortlessly eliminated the human army. The only flaw was the female knight's sword grazed the male lead. Although this blow didn't cause him much harm, the female knight's strength still surprised him greatly. At that moment, a magical dragon appeared before him. This was a high-level, 5th order spell cast by a human mage. Clearly, they were prepared to die. And when the male lead faced the dragon, he pulled the female knight in front of him. Ultimately, the battle ended with him and his companions winning a great victory. That evening, upon hearing the news, the elven chieftain brought several barrels of fine wine to celebrate with the male lead. After a few rounds of drinks, the male lead went to where the captured human soldiers were being held. His original plan was to detain them for a few days, but those ravaged by drugs had clearly given up on their principles. Her subordinates were also terrified by the protagonist's interrogation methods, and at that moment, were trembling with fear. The next day, the protagonist obtained some intelligence from them. He then turned around and gave this intelligence to the elves, in exchange for 10 barrels of fine wine. The main human force planned to utilize their numerical advantage. They split up and launched an attack. The protagonist and his group planned to ambush them along the way. Day 73. The main character actively circles forward to reach the main force's advance route, and sets various traps. The unit led by heavily armored knights is advancing towards the protagonist. Among them are 400 heavily armored soldiers, and 100 wizards. If the elves fight against them, he's afraid they'll get into trouble. But they are just a piece of cake to the male protagonist. Then he ordered the action to begin. Huge trees instantly blocked the troops' retreat. A stone enchanted and strengthened by the male protagonist crushed all those who escaped and resisted. 500 soldiers were defeated by 300 in an instant. Then, Lemai directed a long-range attack, pursuing the soldiers who had escaped. Those who evaded pursuit were surrounded by ambushing goblins. In the end, less than 100 soldiers remained. But under their commander's orders, they quickly constructed a rock defense and began to organize a counterattack. The battle intensified. Seeing this, the male protagonist directly dispatched Agaji. The order was to capture the enemy commander alive. However, humanity's counterattack against Agaji was like a mere tickle. The male protagonist used a 3-to-1 tactic against each enemy soldier. After a thrilling battle, Agaji captured the human commander alive. This battle, like the last, was a complete victory. After reporting the victory to the Elves clan chief via communication device, they began their retreat. Subsequently, Through interrogation of the male lead, we learned why humanity attacked the elves. It was because a princess of a human kingdom called Shudrin Beluda had a fatal illness, and the princess was scheduled to marry into an allied nation soon, the next emperor of the Jerica Empire. So the king ordered a search, at any cost, to find a cure. After searching the entire kingdom, they found an elven elixir blessed by the sub-god of deep green. While the interrogation was ending, Asjiang unexpectedly struck groundwater. Everyone who heard the commotion rushed over. The water flow is getting stronger. Under the protagonist's modifications, the groundwater has actually become a hot spring. There's nothing more wonderful than bathing in a hot spring with one's harem. Nothing could be better. Agaji, after being with his Jiang, couldn't take it after just a little while. The next day, the protagonist brought the captured humans acted as their training target, and after defeating the skeleton, the red-haired commander, Jingren, asked for a fight with the male lead. The male lead didn't expect his companions are going crazy, but he still has the courage to face the male protagonist head-on. Then Ogaji expressed that he also wanted to fight Hongmao. After treatment, Hongmao directly participated in the battle. It seems Ogaji's fighting spirit has also been awakened. Seeing such powerful humans, the harem members said it would be a shame to just keep them as prisoners. After learning more, they found out that the redhead was originally born in a place with a large subhuman population. Compared to those nobles, he said he could relate to the main character and his group better, and seeing the humans here, they can coexist peacefully with the male protagonists. He made up his mind to break away from the empire and fight under the male lead. His sincere eyes are really irresistible to the male protagonist. He can only agree to let him join in. The male protagonist naturally knows how to use his abilities. Day 77. The male protagonist went to the elves and gave away several unwanted prisoners, and asked the leader of the spirit race what elixir the humans wanted. The spirit race leader said that thing had been given to the male lead long ago, and at that time, the male lead only knew that it was a medicine that could cure most diseases, but he didn't expect that to be the elixir the humans wanted. Then he cut his finger. A drop of blood was placed into the human's mouth. The next moment, the severely injured human's wounds were completely healed. Even his back pain was cured. The male protagonist couldn't believe a single drop of blood was so terrifying. If a large amount of blood were ingested, the consequences were unimaginable. Vaguely, the male protagonist also sensed that his power had reached an incredibly terrifying level. Just 2 days later, the male protagonist launched a third attack on the human army, eliminating the human commander with a single blow. The remaining soldiers, facing the overwhelming might of the blood-red gun army, were all annihilated. The male protagonist watched all this without any emotion. The next day, the male lead was invited to the elves' tribe. This time, he brought 2 human girls with him. The elf chieftain had been waiting with wine for a long time. This time, it was thanks to the male lead that the human army was driven to a desperate situation. But the prolonged war did them no good. So the elf chieftain planned to deploy their elite troops in the next war, to end the war in one fell swoop. After discussing some operational details, they left the elves' clan. But just then, the blonde girl said, although she swore allegiance to the male lead, she still hoped to fulfill her duties as a noble of the kingdom. So she hoped the male lead would deliver the elf elixir to the kingdom to save the kingdom's princess. But the blonde girl hadn't considered one problem. The main belief in this world is the 5-pillar god, because their blessing is too powerful. Therefore, conflicts between clans often arise, and the male protagonist is in charge of the end and the blessing of the great god of origin. If the male protagonist leaves like this and send the medicine over, it will definitely cause a new war, although things are difficult to handle. But the male protagonist said that he would definitely satisfy the yellow-haired girl. The male lead scheduled the next battle for near dawn the next day. They would use 650 warriors to fight against 2,000 human soldiers. He had received intelligence the previous day. The human hero knight order would participate in the war, and they were comprised of 8 individuals blessed by the gods, the strongest fighting force. Not only were their combat abilities strong, they also has the ability to strengthen companions who fight together. In other words, the more troops they have, the more powerful they are. But the hero didn't panic at all. On the contrary, he is looking forward to what they will taste like. The male protagonist, who has just arrived at the combat range, directly summoned a large number of skeletons. He asked Ogaji and the others to sweep away the surrounding enemies, and these skeletons to clear out the opponent's command center. Then the war is about to break out. Human sauce. Then the male protagonist used his skills to absorb the blood and water from the ground to make an explosion that wiped out all the soldiers. Just as the protagonist thought the war was over, a child slowly walked towards him. The protagonist recognized him from his appearance as Filippo, the insect hero from Yuan E, the great hero. His eyes were the symbol of the blessing of the demon insect god. Although his behavior and speech were as gentle as a child's, the oppressive aura he exuded was immense. It's someone the male lead has never seen before. He looks like someone who has killed countless people. Filippo then asks the male lead which god he is blessed by. Seeing the male lead remain silent, he decides to teach the male lead a lesson with the immortal worms. The male lead then discovers that these earth soldiers are different from the death scythes. They are not afraid of sunlight. That is to say, that insect is actually a parasitic bioweapon. Just then, the insects suddenly changed. They transformed into different kinds of demonic insects. The next moment, they surrounded the male protagonist. Filippo thought the male protagonist would be devoured completely, but he quickly dealt with these demonic insects. The demonic insects under command had greatly increased in strength, although the male protagonist was injured in the sneak attack, but he still had back and forth fights with these demonic insects. Just then Filippo summoned a huge demonic insect. The hero was shocked. The next moment, he was hit by a demonic insect, and this centipede is one of Filippo's proudest familiars. It is regarded as a disaster-level monster. The male lead is completely helpless in the mouth of the demonic insect. Furthermore, the demonic insect's venom is corroding his body. In a moment, he no longer has the strength to even hold a weapon. Just then, Lemmy, who spends every night with the male lead, senses his danger. Looking around, Filippo discovers in surprise that the male lead has disappeared. But at that moment, the male lead appeared in front of Filippo unscathed, and also launched and survived from that state. The male lead obviously won't tell him how he did it. Then he took out one of his killers, but the male lead didn't even give him a chance to use it. He shattered it directly with the giant. Moreover, they can absorb the abilities of the magic insects, making Filippo a conglomerate of magic insects. The male lead watched this bizarre transformation and bet it would taste great grilled. He activated his manga ability and punched Filippo away with a single blow. Then, he unleashed his ultimate magic, but unexpectedly, it was dodged. Filippo commented that the protagonist possessed such powerful strength. Juan, who activated manga abilities, was surprisingly not a palm awakener. It's truly unbelievable. The protagonist wondered what a palm awakener was. Filippo refused to. He knocked Filippo to the ground in just 2.5 seconds. Faced with the powerful male lead, Filippo immediately used the Golden River escape. He ran wildly into the forest. The male lead was about to step forward to intercept, but was stopped by the empty shell. Although he easily split the empty shell in half, Filippo's figure had already disappeared into the forest. The male lead was furious and swore that next time he would definitely catch him. At that moment, after dealing with Lemmy on the other side, she arrived by the male lead's side, and during the previous battle, sent by the male lead deep into the forest, his secret ability-wielding clone found the next heir to the Jade Throne, and told him that he no longer intended to continue fighting with him. He gave him the elf elixir without his knowledge. All he had to do was give this to the bedridden princess. Then he left silently. The humans at that moment were drenched in sweat from what had just happened. They immediately ordered a return to the palace. Although the male protagonist had the opportunity to kill the next king, but if he did so, the kingdom would inevitably stake its national prestige to eliminate him. The male protagonist then prayed, and don't properly bury the dead, they will become restless spirits or ghosts. Everyone felt differently at this moment. The goblin protagonist didn't expect after the war ended, he would kindly release the prisoners of war he had captured, but these captives didn't intend to accept his kindness. Instead, they wanted to seize the goblin leader's position. Upon hearing this, Lemmy was instantly furious, but since they had the courage to challenge, the male protagonist didn't mind letting them understand their own strength. The male protagonist then noticed the ghost bead equipment they were using. It could greatly enhance their combat capabilities. Even if damaged, it could automatically repair itself. Then the male lead simply threw 2 punches and directly rendered them combat incapable. He also left his mark on the tree. The others couldn't even last half a round against him. Just then, an ape-man ambushed the male lead from behind and blasted him into a pile of rocks. The male lead said that the reason he was just attacked because his surprise attack was well-timed. That's why he took the hit. Just then the male protagonist discovered a half-vampire who was teasing Lemmy. He even boasted that he would defeat the male protagonist and become Lemmy's husband. His words instantly enraged the male protagonist. After all, daring to hit on Lion Mumi in front of him, he couldn't just let him go. If it weren't for Lion Mumi's intervention, under the protagonist's fist, the half-vampire's head would have been smashed open. Finally, driven by kindness, the protagonist still dripped his own blood into the half-vampire's mouth. Among the remaining slaves, there were inevitably some powerful races. They didn't show any malice towards the protagonist. Instead, they were very grateful to him. Their understanding and reasonableness left the male protagonist deeply impressed. Just then, the half-vampire who had just been brutally beaten by the male protagonist filled the male protagonist with immense disgust. In the post-battle statistics, the male protagonist discovered that the healer, Gob, had also evolved into a half-holy ghost. Moreover, he had gained a skill known as the Holy Power Field. Even if the male protagonist didn't use any skills, he would need at least 20 punches to break through its incredibly strong defense. Hobgoblin, who loves rotten flesh, has become a Shikigami because she often ate the corpses the male lead summoned. So it's only natural that she transformed like this. But what the male lead didn't expect was that the evolved Hobgoblin also awakened a lovesick heart. And the way she looks at him, he's afraid she's thinking something strange in her heart. Hobgoblin evolved into a Hyaki Yako, 100 demons. That's bad at frontal combat. She can use magic to assist, and her eyes possess an enviable ability to see through things. 7 mid-level ghosts have also evolved into large ghosts. The male protagonist also discovered that the usually selfish goblins, under his leadership, were surprisingly able to unite and show compassion for their companions. Under a brief period of calm, the male protagonist begins focusing on improving the comfort of the base. The first priority is to renovate the hot springs. The goal is to allow the beautiful elves to come and bathe as well. Additionally, Asjiang has finished mining all the elf stones. This is thanks to Lusitana and Velvet. After all, the elf stones are the legacy of the mage Velvet. It was Lusitana who guarded them. That's how he obtained these spirit stones. Afterwards, the male lead decided, out of gratitude, to eat these things. Then, using the skeleton's bones, he created a makeshift vehicle, a skeletal mount. This way, he could take his harem to the human town, and simultaneously make a name for his mercenary group. But the harem thought he was trying to send them away. The male lead said that after all, he had promised to send them back, but their decision to stay or leave would be made in town. In the following days, because of this, Red Hair was often distracted during training, and it wasn't just her. The other girls also wanted to stay by the male lead's side. After spending a long time together, they were living very happily here. At the same time, they were also impressed by the male lead's powerful abilities. They dared not imagine a life without him. How difficult it would be. The day to go to the human town finally arrived. The male lead established 4 rules for everyone. The first is to obtain intelligence. Second, if a member encounter a dispute, they have to try to resolve it the shelves. Third, all members must complete the upgrade upon their return this time. Fourth, absolutely no one can die. Afterwards, the male protagonist and his group split up and headed towards the human town. They arrived at the human town. The land occupies 40% of the entire town. They thought they could enter the town smoothly. They didn't expect that the humans here were all terrified when they saw the male lead. Finally, after the human girl's earnest explanation, the male protagonist and his friends successfully found a place to stay. As soon as they arrived, the male lead told the harem members an important matter. That is, during their time in the town, they could make their own decisions. Should they stay by the male lead's side or leave this place? He will respect their choices to the fullest extent. But in fact, he doesn't want the girls to leave. Then, led by Red Hair, he found the Adventurers Guild. The rest helped him sell the items brought from the base. He didn't expect that as soon as he entered the guild, he scared a large group of people. Fortunately, after he knocked them unconscious, nothing happened. After revealing his mercenary identity, he successfully registered as an adventurer. After returning to his residence, he wanted to go to Ghost Town to gather some information. He then transformed into his human form. This appearance is exactly how the male lead looked in his past life. On the way to Ghost City, the male lead discovered that the entire town was discussing the arrival of this great ghost. Clearly, the people here were terrified by their arrival. Just as the male lead was about to relieve himself, he discovered someone was following him, and his path ahead was also blocked. Although in the town, the male lead shows no mercy. He directly devours them and gains a set of skills. Soon, the male lead notices that these people are all wearing the same ring. Just as the male lead wonders whether they belong to the same organization, he notices a robbery happening behind him, and the male lead sees that they are also wears this ring. The next moment, the male lead makes his move. In 2 moves, he knocks out everyone present, and he implants his clones into them, because the male lead thinks these people are not simple. After leaving the alley, the male lead gives the blonde-haired man a communication card, saying that if there's anything the guild can't handle, He can find him. He can hear you as long as you speak to the card. Then, he directly reveals his true form. It's to show his true strength in front of the blonde-haired man, and also to intimidate him. That night, sure enough, the blonde-haired man came to ask him for help. The reason was that the princess of the kingdom was stationed in this city, but escaped from their custody. As a result, she was kidnapped by that organization. After understanding the situation, the protagonist reassured blonde-haired boy not to worry, because he had already found the location where those people were hiding. The protagonist discovered from the papers in his hand that the kidnapping had actually been planned in advance. Then, the protagonist set fire and burned down the house where the princess was held. The next day, the male lead asked his harem about their decision. To his surprise, they all wanted to stay by his side. Just then, the princess he rescued last night came to find him. She specifically came to thank him. The harem looked completely puzzled at this moment. Then the princess revealed that she was Princess Rebelia of the Kingdom of Sudarlu in Beirut. The princess then said that she learned the protagonist has a mercenary group, so now she must assign him a mission, which is to escort her to the royal capital, Oswar. The protagonist was also taken aback by this. He stated that he has important matters to attend to as well. In the following conversation, the protagonist discovered Leah actually sneaked out to travel. The male lead also seized the opportunity to give Leah a good lecture, but he found that this lecture was completely ineffective on her. At this moment, the blonde guy said that if the male lead accepted the mission, they planned to give him a golden brick as a reward. Upon hearing this, the harem members lost their composure, directly demanding the male lead to take on the task. You know, 1 ingot of gold is equivalent to 1 trillion yen. Under the soft and hard persuasion of the harem, the male lead reluctantly accepted the task. The next day, everyone gathered at the city gates. At this moment, the male lead noticed that Leah's guard was absent. After asking around, he learned that Leah had secretly sneaked out. The guards are probably searching the whole city for her right now. If they're discovered, they'll definitely be treated as kidnappers. Then the male lead set off for the capital with Leah. Along the way, he had to constantly watch Leah because she was constantly causing him trouble. In just one day, the male lead shoulder became Leah's exclusive seat. In the evening, they discussed the route for the second day. If they take the cliff path, it's the shortest, but also the most dangerous. The safest route is along the river. On the other side of the cliff lives the strongest race in the area. Not only are they agile, but their claws also secrete a paralyzing poison. At this time, everyone agreed that it's best to follow the safe river, but unexpectedly, the male lead decided to take the cliff path, and he also wanted to hunt the Jade Emperor King. The next day, the male lead stood on the car roof to protect everyone. Faced with the attack of several birds, the protagonist easily took care of it. He even treated everyone to a different world version of spiced chicken stew. Up to this point, the protagonist still hadn't encountered the legendary Jade Song King. However, judging by the surroundings, he sensed an unusual presence. At that moment, the protagonist warned everyone not to go outside because he saw something incredible. At this moment, everyone in the car was on edge. They had already been waiting for an hour, and there was still no news from the male lead. Just then, everything outside suddenly went silent. Everyone was incredibly nervous. The next moment, they saw the male lead's arm, and it was a severed arm lying on the ground. At this moment, the male lead had not only lost an arm, he's even missing a leg. Everyone is filled with concern for the male lead's situation. The male lead's weapon also fell to the ground with a thud. In the next moment, the male lead activated his spider silk skill. He wrapped the severed limb on the ground and sent it straight into his mouth. To everyone's shock, the male lead devoured the severed limb. In an instant, his missing arms and legs grew back. Sure enough, the male lead at full power is terrifyingly strong. He instantly killed the Jade Azure King, who possessed enhanced power. After witnessing the male lead's strength, the accompanying Oni turned ashen-faced. Later, when the male lead examined the Azure King's body, he discovered a glint under its feathers. After taking it out, he found it to be the Jade King's Spirit Stone. You have to know that among 1,000 Emerald Song Kings with blessing power, not even one of them has this thing in its body. Its value could buy a small country. After eating it, the male lead obtained Arrow Feather, Sky Hunter, Storm God's Blessing, and a series of other skills. This question was asked countless times in the male lead's past life. But the male lead's answer never changed. Because I killed it, so I ate it. No matter what I kill, it's for myself to survive better. If someone dies because of me, I might eat them too, to bear their regrets and resentment. As everyone knows, goblins can never sleep with a saintess. But our goblin protagonist got two twin sisters pregnant at once, and the babies they gave birth to were actually mixed species. It's said that the probability of this happening is only 1 in a million, and our protagonist, swept up in the anime, also unexpectedly evolved into Leaf Tion Tonzi. Blessed with the power of protection, the male lead was on the road with a group leaving the defensive city. The protagonist noticed the twins didn't look well. They said that it might be because of the massive meal they made for the whole village yesterday. So the protagonist told him to rest well. But what he didn't expect was, the next day, the twins' stomachs had grown larger. The inexperienced male protagonist could only call Gob to ask for advice. Gob told the male protagonist that the ogre's children would absorb nutrients from their mother's womb, and a human's weak body couldn't handle it. If the nutrients were insufficient, they would burst out of the belly. So the male protagonist decided to find a nearby place suitable for their birth. The twins also told the male lead not to worry too much, because they are carrying his child, so they are happy. But 2.5 minutes later, the alchemist noticed their wrists becoming very thin. They looked like they were being drained, and the restorative potions couldn't replenish their nutrients. Seeing this, the male lead directly tore off his own arm for the twin to eat because it is more nutritious. Although they knew the male lead had regenerative abilities and could recover from injuries, they were still very resistant. So the male lead bit off his own flesh. After a while, the male lead finally found a suitable cave. The black bear inhabiting the cave was also eliminated by the Oni tribe. The twins' stomachs grew larger and larger. The male lead can only continuously administer anesthesia and treatment to alleviate their pain. 2.5 minutes later, the male lead using blood clones to transmit images for Hob to observe at all times. When the timing is right, he uses techniques from his past life to perform a C-section. Accompanied by the sound of crying, the twins successfully gave birth to their babies, and the wounds on their bellies were completely healed by the male lead using his blood. And on the 111th day after birth, he became the father of the 2 children. At this time, Goblin Grandpa told the male lead some bad news. He had just checked on the children and discovered that they were actually mixed beings. If a human conceives a child with a mythical being, generally, the offspring inherits the father's race. But there's a 1 in a million chance of giving birth to a mixed being. They become incredibly powerful upon reaching adulthood, and this race is not recognized. Ultimately, they are treated as monsters. But the male protagonist doesn't care. He believes that as long as he still loves them, then there's no problem. Because the 2 children were born with spirit pearls, the male lead named them Jinju and Inju. The next day, the male lead went hunting to supplement the children's nutrition. When he went hunting alone, he soon encountered a deer. It gave him a feeling of being aloof and elegant. Even if the male lead tries his best, he is only 30% sure of defeating his opponent. Just as the male protagonist prepared for a desperate fight, he noticed that the white egret didn't seem hostile towards him. He saw the egret quickly shake its head, and a pair of antlers fell to the ground. The antlers, like a gift for the male protagonist. Then the deer leaped over the male protagonist's head. Its speed was far beyond what he could match. Just as he was about to eat the pair of antlers, his intuition told him he should save them for his own children. So the male protagonist continued on his journey with the antlers. He saw a human team fighting the Fermoy tribe. This team worked together extremely well in battle. The male protagonist thought, this is the strongest team he has encountered since his reincarnation. The enemy's minions can't do any damage to them at all. With a swift motion, he ended the battle in no time. The main character's move is called the 7 Swords of Destruction. Its power was so great that it even startled him for a moment. He was afraid of accidentally injuring these humans. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to fight alongside them anymore. Looking at the person before him, he felt that if he didn't intervene, the other party could easily defeat this boss. The aura emanating from the other party made him think so. Then he gave the other party a recovery potion and said that his master had killed this boss. Naturally, the corpse also needed to be collected. Then the male protagonist left. The blonde-haired one said the male lead probably didn't obtain the power of the poem, but when he looked into his eyes, he found himself unable to move. His ability foreshadowed the outcome of the battle with the male lead. On the way back to town, the male lead ate the boss's flesh, and thus he gained many more skills. But to his astonishment, his son could already walk, and he will even call him Dad. The male protagonist was both amused and exasperated. Then he crushed the antlers and fed them to the children. After eating, their abilities increased significantly. The male protagonist and Red Hair also tried a little. They gained 2 incredibly awesome skills. As for Red Hair, he also obtained a new profession called Devourer of sacred beasts. At night, when the hero falls asleep, his level has exceeded the upper limit, so he gained a series of skills and fields, and he was also named Yitai Tongzi. Kazuhiro Arai is famous for having dozens of elves share one woman, and our goblin hero, he has a harem. That's because he reincarnated with a devouring system. Even Gabuji, who gained both lightning and fire attributes, is no match for him. On the way to the royal capital, the main character's other two harem members are also pregnant with his child. However, with the experience from last time, this delivery went smoothly. The blacksmith gave birth to a baby who possessed the strength of a great Oni from birth. The alchemist, however, gave birth to a human girl, but they both share the protagonist's bloodline. Then, everyone arrived at their final stop, Bakutori. To avoid attention, the princess changed her clothes. The protagonist takes Kabumi and Red Hair to the market to buy supplies. At one stall, he buys a magical item similar to a camera. So, after returning to the inn, he starts taking photos of the children non-stop. At night, the protagonist finally remembers that he hasn't contacted the members of his group for a long time. So, he uses a Bluetooth earpiece created with his blood clone to call everyone. Fortunately, they didn't encounter any major problems while gathering intelligence, and there were no major issues. But when contacting Gabogi, the protagonist saw himself split in two. The next morning, the protagonist and the princess discussed taking a detour to the maze city where Gabogi is. He didn't expect the princess to agree so readily, so they set off on their journey to the labyrinth city. On the way, he noticed Gabumii was still wearing the jewelry that he had given to her back in the goblin days. It turned out that as she watched the protagonist grow stronger, she was still stuck at the half-vampire stage. Meanwhile, those human harem girls could have the protagonist's children. She is the same race as the male lead, but she can't have his child. It makes her very sad. But with the male lead's comfort, Kabumi quickly cheered up. The next day, they finally arrived at the maze city. The scene before them shocked him. The difference in their sizes had become so great. I always felt Gobji's mouth was a little strange. Then Gobjiang explained to the male lead about killing him. It turns out that in the deepest part of the dungeon, a rare monster called the Astral Nemesis appeared. It is said that this monster can materialize the strongest opponent in the combatant's heart, and it possesses 100% of its own strength. Gabaji couldn't last a round against him, but luckily, at the crucial moment, due to his strong will, he completed his evolution, and the main character saw the scene. After understanding the truth, the main character decided to leave tomorrow, but Gabuji wanted to fight the main character again. After all, he had evolved into an Oni, so the two of them arrived at the competing grounds. Then the male protagonist noticed the axe and shield he had given to the other person seemed to have been enhanced as well. But Dabogi just wanted to defeat the male protagonist and then be his equal. He felt that only then could he be a true friend to the male protagonist. In the next second, the two sides collided. The male lead was knocked back a step. Then, the goblin charged again. The male lead noticed that, although the goblin was large, its speed was extremely fast. At the moment of impact, lightning and flames erupted. Although the male lead's lightning immunity buff was fully stacked, but his fire resistance is still not enough, so he can only rely on his regeneration ability to heal his wounds. Then the two clashed again. Unexpectedly, the male protagonist, that sneaky guy, attempted a sneak attack. Fortunately, the battle-hardened Gabuji noticed in time. He then used the additional skill of his shield to firmly suppress the male protagonist. Left with no choice, the male protagonist activated his diamond strength. This technique significantly increases the male lead's strength. He lifted the goblin with one hand. Then he used a battle technique. He pinned his opponent, leaving him breathless. At this moment, the goblin seemed to lose his mind. He jumped into the air, preparing to deliver an elbow strike to the male lead. The male lead didn't expect that just the day before, he was still worrying about Linia's delayed evolution. Now she has become a blood-sucking noble subspecies. And she even has her own true name, Eclipse God Awakening. Now, she has finally evolved to a level that matches the protagonist. What the protagonist didn't expect is that, after returning to the village, the scene before him made him unable to believe this was his original home. And all of this is the work of Ogarji and Asjiang. The male protagonist finally escorted the princess to the capital. The splendor of the city left the male protagonist utterly astonished. They arrived at the castle. The women were seeing such a beautiful house for the first time. After some explanation, they realized that this was actually just the princess's private residence. Then, to show her gratitude, The princess invited the male protagonist to stay the night here. They're preparing a special reward for the male lead. The male lead naturally wouldn't refuse such a good chance. After a satisfying meal, everyone began to rest, but they couldn't fall asleep for a long time. The vastness of the room left them feeling strangely unsettled, and the bed was incredibly soft. The entire room was so fragrant, which makes it hard to relax. But the little one slept soundly. The next day after, the male lead had just woken up. The princess had everyone gather in the hall. In addition to the promised reward, the princess also gave the male lead a royal certificate signed by her. As long as he shows this document anywhere, he won't be questioned and can directly enter the royal city. The male lead never expected the princess would give him something like this. He asked the princess if she's afraid of them misusing it. The princess then says what kind of person the male lead is. She has already roughly figured it out during the journey, so she's not worried. She is sure that the male lead won't commit any atrocities against the kingdom. The male lead didn't expect that all along the way, the night princess was just an illusion. In fact, she had been secretly observing him the whole time. The male protagonist then planned to set off back to the village. Before leaving, he spread many of his clones around here. He had a feeling that he would inevitably return to this place one day. On the way back to the village, the male protagonist noticed that Lemii still looked upset. It turned out that she was still troubled by her own strength. Unable to catch up with the male protagonist, she was watching as her companions grew stronger one by one, but she remains the same. The protagonist asks her level. Upon learning it's level 89, the anime protagonist decides to arrange special training for her. After finding a clearing, the protagonist uses his lower-ranked giant generation to create several giants. With these opponents, the protagonist estimates this special training seems to have yielded good results. Liamei immediately launched her attack. The battle continued until dusk. In the end, Liamei defeated 5 black formers, 10 black trolls, and 20 black ogres. The protagonist was very satisfied with this. He then carried an exhausted Liamei back to the camp. The little one was also very happy to see the protagonist return. In the evening, Lemmi's body was quietly undergoing changes. The protagonist's system also gave a prompt, world poem, the Black Erosion Demon Story. The secondary character, Lemmi, has undergone evolution and obtained the title of Ice Realm Empress, as well as the title of Demon Servant's Wife. With the activation of the Demon Servant's Wife title, the new title of Demon Servant's Concubine has also been unlocked. The animation is currently selecting suitable candidates. The next day, after the male protagonist wakes up, he discovers that Lemmi has completed her evolution, and she looks even more alluring and charming than before. She has now evolved into a vampire noble subspecies. She has obtained her true name, Lunar Eclipse Awakening. Her current strength finally qualifies her to become the male protagonist's true wife. Shortly after, the male protagonist embraces Lemmi. Compared to her evolution, as long as she can stay by the male protagonist's side, the male protagonist is very satisfied. The next day, the male protagonist finally returns to the village, but the scene before him leaves the male protagonist in disbelief. At this moment, Oga Ji and Asjang walk out from the middle. The male protagonist realizes that they are the last to return from all the teams, and they also missed the chance to renovate the cave. This time, the transformation, along with the outside, has undergone tremendous changes. As the population grew, they cleared a large area of land. It was at this moment that the male protagonist discovered that the tree spirit had also moved here, and it seemed to have evolved. The male protagonist didn't realize that his actions had been closely observed by Lemmi. After arriving at the living area, the male protagonist couldn't believe how spacious this place was. Just then, Sei hurriedly ran over. He said that Goblin Grandpa, who is hospitalized, is about to pass away. In the following scene, the male protagonist introduces his child to Goblin Grandpa. Upon seeing this, Goblin Grandpa was greatly relieved. This generation still carries the male protagonist's strong genes. The male protagonist said he had something to announce before Goblin Grandpa dies, because he is now an apostle demon, so he will change his name to Apollo. Just a quick announcement. Lemmi's appropriate name will be changed to Ghana, as Jiang, being a subspecies of the landmine ghost, will retain its original name. Everyone is very satisfied with the new names. At this time, Gabi expresses that the male protagonist's naming is too casual. Then Gabi says he already senses that he is nearing his end. He has lived a fairly long life, and he can see the protagonist's rise. He was already very satisfied. And so, Gob-sama left this world. 2.5 seconds later, the main character cremated Gob-sama. Actually, Gob-sama was only in his 20s. perhaps a goblin's life is just that short. The next day, the main character gathered everyone from the mercenary group. Because everyone's strength had changed, the main character decided to have them improve through sparring to decide the mercenary group's rankings. After a day of intense sparring, the battle between the male lead and Gabuji didn't end until dusk. The rankings were then confirmed. First place, the male lead. Second place, Gabuji. Third place, Ghana. Fourth place, Asjiang. Fifth place, Bilali. Sixth place, Spexing. More than his own victory, he is happy about everyone's tremendous growth. It made the protagonist even happier. Later that night, the protagonist received a call from the princess. He then asked why the princess was contacting him so late. The princess said she wanted to request his help again. Without thinking, he knew it was trouble again. Even though the princess feigned ignorance, the protagonist was sure she was scheming something big behind the scenes. Because his other self had already figured it all out, he still just doesn't know the exact details. The princess said she just wanted more people to know about the male lead's existence. She then shared her thoughts with the male lead. The next day, the male lead gathered everyone.